Hi, everyone.
Hi, how are you?
Hey,
How's it going, Jed?
Good. How are you?
I'm good,
Good.
thanks.
I did go.
That's me. So we're just waiting on Paul Forrest. Paul's he's the chair today. He he was supposed to be chairing an event for us last week, and he hasn't been very well. But I'm hoping he should be okay. He's been texting this morning, so I'm hoping he can join us any minute, which would be great. But I feel as if we could get started here and we can get going. There's over 65 people joined so far. We'll give it a couple of minutes, let more people join, then we'll get started.
Okay. Thanks for wearing a hat, Jedediah. I always get concerned when people are too.
I was thinking the same thing. It's the lockdown hidden the lack of haircut.
Oh, see, I'm hiding this ugly mullet haircut, which it's considered white trash in the U.S., but it's my end of the world haircut.
Hey, there's no judgment here. In a week or two, I think I'll have dreadlocks.
Yeah. Well, we don't do haircuts anymore because of COVID, and I've got two young boys, and their hair has become, it's beautiful because normally you're always cutting their hair, but we don't cut their hair. So their hair is down to their shoulders almost, and it's becoming very curly. It's just funny. So as a parent, I'm like celebrating my boys' man buns or their beautiful locks that I never knew they had.
You might spark new hairstyles for men now.
That's right. Everyone's gonna have long hair.
So the mullet was a choice then for the shaved. Have you got the full shave size?
Yeah, I got the funny thing about the mullet is I was on a panel with this person I look up to, and before the panel I realized my hair was growing sideways under my hat. I was like, ugh. And so I cut it, and then I took my hat off later, and my wife thought, oh, you need to finish whatever you were trying to do. So it's really out of laziness. Everything I do is out of laziness. So why do you have a beard? Laziness. Why do you have that haircut? Laziness.
I noticed you did a poll on LinkedIn about.
I did.
Yeah.
I got 50 people to register for the conference, and I use the marketing attribute Ben's mullet. So the marketing department knows that 50 people came to that conference because of my mullet.
Fantastic.
People are asking to see the mullet.
Oh, okay.
They're asking.
Robin, I'm hoping you're growing one like that now.
Well,
I don't know.
so I bought a car yesterday, a Toyota Sequoia, and when I was buying it, the sales rep at the very end, he said, "You have a mullet?" Kind of like, people with mullets don't buy these cars.
These pickups round here.
I know. That's right.
So Paul is joining us. He should be on any minute now. But it may be good. We could. So obviously, thanks very much for joining the panel today. I really appreciate it. It's quite an exciting topic for us. It's a discussion that comes up a lot at the moment within a lot of the kind of data leadership panels and roundtables we have. But MBN, my name's Michael Young. I'm the founder of MBN Solutions. But we've actually been running a graduate program in Scotland at the moment where we work with the data lab in 11 universities. So we've placed over 250 graduates into industry for their MSCs over the past 3 years. So it's a very important topic that comes up a lot, and it'll be good to. I think it'd be good to discuss this in more detail with industry experts like yourself. I don't know if before Paul joins us, if everyone wants to maybe do a quick intro, tell the audience about yourselves. Maybe starting with yourself, Ben.
Okay. My name is Ben Taylor. You can find me online, Ben Taylor Data. I studied chemical engineering. I worked for Intel and Micron for 5 years. I worked for a hedge fund, And then I joined a Sequoia Capital company called HireVue. We've done work with Unilever and a lot of the Fortune 100 companies in the US. I did that for 4 years, and then I got the itch to do a startup. And I started Zeph.ai 3 years ago, which was a deep learning AutoML startup. And we were recently acquired by DataRobot. So I work for DataRobot now, and I'm their chief AI evangelist.
Well, thanks very much. Over to you, Jed.
Sure, thanks. So after PhD, I worked with Expedia, building search and recommendations, and then I joined ASOS.com to create a machine learning department there. So did that for 4 years, and then in 2017 left ASOS to create a startup. Initially doing machine learning consultancy for 1.5 years, and then pivoting into in a startup studio where we're building startups from scratch. So I've done both large corporates and startup.
Thanks very much, Jed. Tanuki.
Hi, I'm Tanuki. I've got quite a varied background. So before I got into data science, I was actually working in digital for quite a long time. And I even ran my own digital design consultancy for, over 8 years, basically creating, online brands and websites for the arts and design industry. And at some point I decided I want to change my career, just do something different. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, so I went back to university. I studied behavioral economics, and then I saw a PhD which would advertise saying, use online data to understand human behavior. And I thought this was perfect. I can use my previous knowledge and combine it now with something I'm really interested in. So that's how my whole passion in data science started. And yes, I did a PhD. Basically, I was looking at the connection between beautiful places and our well-being using online data and deep learning. And I have now became a commercial data scientist. So I worked at Channel 4 as a senior data scientist. I'm now the lead data scientist at Popsa, and that's a startup in the photo book space. So we're using AI to automatically curate people's photos into beautifully designed photo books. But I do still have one foot in the door still in the research. So I'm also a visiting researcher at the Alan Turing Institute, which is a UK National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. So that's it.
Thanks very much. Vicky.
So I'm Vicky Byram. I'm head of analytics for Merkle. My background is, so I started in this trade before it was called data science and it was just called statistics. So I'm a bit more old school than the data scientists that we've got on the panel as well. I was a research statistician for the NHS, so I know that this talk is kind of it's corporate versus startup, but obviously we've got public sector and third sector are also deploying AI solutions now, so kind of keep them in mind when you're looking for your next roles as well. So research statistician, and then I went and joined Deloitte, worked in Deloitte for a while, and then went into RBS, as it's now NatWest. I worked within kind of customer analytics and finance roles then for a good number of years. I got the startup itch as well and joined a startup which was at that time called Aquila Insights. It was a small team that was had large aspirations of bringing kind of analytics to the board level. I've helped build up that team, so it's now kind of like a multi-award winning team that we have a number of offices around the UK. We got acquired by Merkle, so I was a startup and now I've turned into a corporate again, and we've been going through that transition of our integration, and also during that time I've done work with the Scottish Government on advising on AI. So that's my background.
Thanks very much. No, that's great. Yeah, we'll get started with some questions now. That'd be great. I think kicking off one of the first questions to look at, what should entrants take into consideration when thinking to join a corporate or a startup in terms of culture, tools, and team?
I can start it if you want. It's been a question that I've kind of figured out because it's a question I had when I just went into data science. Like, do I want to work for a corporate and do I want to work for a startup? And it really depends on what you're looking for. and what you're comfortable with. So startups are quite exciting because it's like they really push innovation, and if you like always being challenged and trying new things, then that is a good space for you. But of course, with that kind of being pushed and always trying innovation, it might feel like you're also on a roller coaster all the time. So if you like that feeling, that's a good place for you. If you don't like that feeling, that's not a good place for you. I have friends that have gone more into the kind of the corporate side of data science, and then you get to work on projects for a longer period of time. It might be, you might have more support because you kind of got like a lot more corporate backing, I guess, to kind of develop something more for the long term. It might feel slow, but if that's what you like, then that's kind of the environment that would be suited for you. So it really depends on your personality and what you're looking for.
Thanks very much.
So I've worked for, and we all have, we work for corporations and startups, so we can kind of compare the two. I really push new people coming out of college to work for a startup because you wear a lot of hats. And there's a comment here where they're asking about whether a startup is safe. And I definitely have a strong reaction to that. And so the short answer is, working for a big corporation which promises job security in a way is a little bit of a lie. And the reason it's a lie is because you're not tooling up. You're not progressing as fast as you would in a startup. And definitely to Shanuki's comments, it's a roller coaster. What I noticed at startups I've worked with, the competency level of the engineers I worked with, they had very high job security in the market. Maybe not the startup. So if they left their startup, they get a handful of job offers tomorrow. People that worked in corporate, I felt like they had no job security in the market. They had job security at the company, but eventually the company laid some of them off. So, but yeah, that's kind of my quick thoughts on that.
I would also say, well, what type of startup? So again, it's this idea that all startups are equal. No, all corporates are equal. No, I think this kind of current crisis has kind of impacted an awful lot of large corporates in a very kind of detrimental way, and I think it's going to impact a lot of startups in a very positive way. So I don't think there is a one size fits all for that particular question.
So one of the things I'd say is, I guess you can look at this in across a number of categories. So Ben spoke to this question of risk, and I think for most people in the data science space, there are usually more jobs on offer than people to fill those jobs, and so and that's a great kind of place to be as a candidate. I think if you're just starting your career and you're looking to gain experience, if you go into a startup where perhaps you're the only data scientist, there's probably less opportunity to learn from other more seasoned and experienced people. Whereas if you join an organization, perhaps you can sort of work under or work with people who've been doing that job for a number of years. And so I think there, working with a large company definitely, I would say, outweighs there's a significant benefits of joining a large team. I think also note that a lot of startups would have not potentially less data than large corporates. And so if what you're working on requires a significant amount of data, significant exposure to customers as well, then a large corporation will potentially be able to give you much more exposure than you would be able to get at a startup.
Thanks very much. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yep, hear you okay. How you doing? All right?
You're just going to have to excuse me for my slightly croaky voice, which I've been trying to get resolved this morning. But, you have to trust me that when I say that it doesn't hurt to speak, it genuinely doesn't. It just sounds awful. But it goes with a haircut.
Right. Excellent. All right, so Paul, you happy to take over as a chair? And
yes, of course.
Here, we just started with one question there.
Yeah, I heard where you were coming from there, and I think I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I genuinely don't. I have this notion in my head that there are types of organizations, and if you ignore the categorization of those as either startups or corporates, which is just push those to one side, there are attractive organizations to work for because they have an offer, an employment offer, or they make extend an offer to people to potentially join their business because of the challenge that they can put on the table for them. So if we start from a starting point of what makes an attractive offer for a data scientist to want to join any organization, I'd be keen to hear your views on what you think that looks like. What would have enticed you, and what do you think you might use to entice new members to your teams?
So maybe I'll just jump in there, and I'd say, so when I was getting started in my career about, decade ago, I remember at the time one of my business mentors said to me, look, think of your career as a portfolio, and over the next 10 to 15 years, you want to look back at that portfolio, and you can, to an extent, you can design how you want that portfolio to look, right? So, and so I think the question of brand equity is a significant one. And so, as an example, if you've worked at a company that has good reputation, either for its culture or its robustness in how it operates and what it builds, you by virtue of working there would have learned how to do things well. And a lot of organizations would be very interested in you coming and helping them to make those sorts of improvements in the future. So I'd say the reputation of the organization is really important. And I think I would say consider leadership, consider the people who are leading the teams wherever you're deciding to work, because experiencing and learning good leadership is one of the things that could really accelerate your career, right? Those are two things I would highlight.
And just building on what Jedediah is saying, I think kind of sometimes, this idea of that all startups are, kind of really great, fantastic, innovative places to work. They can also be kind of, there's a bit of a culture of personality from the founders, and especially if they've got very sort of fixed ideas, it's their baby, they want to grow it, whether they are open for really kind of help, allowing you to help them develop it and take it further. I think that's, it's a really kind of key question for you to understand. So it's kind of maybe not necessarily just talking to the hiring manager, it's making sure you've got a really good understanding of the culture of the organization and whether you fit appropriately within that mix.
Yeah, there's a concept that's often discussed within the private equity circles relating to startups that have reached scale up stage, but they still refer to them as pre-values stage. And pre-value stage is where the organization hasn't yet matured enough to distill that personality that might be sitting with the founders into a set of values that can be embodied by all who then join or all who then follow. And I think it's an interesting concept because they see that often is a reason why that startup might struggle to retain the quality workforce that it initially had, because it hasn't yet matured that side of the culture in the organization. That's not to say it doesn't happen in some areas, and clearly there are many outliers. But I'd be interested in views about how important you think that is, that you can translate that founder personality into something which it becomes part of the fabric of the business going forward and gives people confidence that they're not joining something that's going to look fundamentally different in a short period of time, which might introduce risk from their own perspective.
No, I mean, the founders are really important in a startup. They do create the culture, they will lead the culture. So if you are going to join a startup, it's so important to meet the founders and to decide. So if you have an interview and you don't get to meet the founders, don't make a decision based on that, because they will completely shape the culture, everyday part of the culture of the business. And you have to make sure you really get on with them. And then you can have a conversation with them. You can ask them, like, what's your roadmap? What's your strategy for your product? And just make sure that you are feeling confident that they are supportive of the ideas that you might have that you want to bring to the company. And if you can have that rapport, then that's usually a good sign if you can have that rapport at the beginning. Make sure you do have that rapport then.
Yeah. So some founders too, they develop So when a founder starts a company at a young seed stage, they're developing themselves. And so I've seen companies' cultures change. So you look at a founder during the seed and the A versus later on, and the founder themselves will change their personality, their seasonality, the mistakes, the experience they get. I love the question about what to look for when you're trying to join a company on the data science perspective. And one of the things I've said that some people have not liked, they found it a little frustrating or discouraging, is for new college grads, I like to call them hello world candidates. And that's not to slam them or kind of knock them down. It's kind of to raise awareness that the skill sets you learned in school are very different than the skill sets that are expected at work in an industry. And so the specific gaps that they're lacking are on communication, business acumen, building a model that provides value. But then we also get a lot of complaints where they're not prepared for the real world data sets. And so for everyone on the call, we've dealt with extreme skew. We've had that scenario where I've got a model with 99% accuracy. This is the best day of my life. And then you find out, well, actually it wasn't, and it was a lie. And I fell into this trap. So missing data, model skew, there's a long list of these data nightmares that students have not been prepared for. And so I like to think a lot about breadth. How do you give them the breadth of experience? And then the last thought is, some data scientists get really sad and frustrated because they land in a business intelligence position. And they're kind of like, I thought I was going to be a data scientist, and I'm not learning these skill sets in my job.
Yeah, I would basically agree with that. So make sure you need to make sure they understand what a data scientist is going to do. Make sure that they can tell you what they think you're going to do, because I have definitely seen that in the past where it's a business like insights job advertised as a data scientist in there.
To what extent though do you as a panel consider that in smaller startups there may be an overwhelming necessity to evolve that role very quickly? So what you end up doing 3 months in is fundamentally different to what you were potentially hired to do, either because there's a lack of capacity or because we didn't really know what the capabilities were we needed to secure, compared with the corporate world where there's generally a more prescriptive, more defined role, which you're more likely to settle into and still be doing the same thing in 3 months' time that you were contracted to do in the first place.
Yeah, we definitely see that evolution where you're working on this type of problem, and then 6 months later it's NLP, and 6 months later it's deep learning, and you're an expert at none, and you're having to kind of ramp on these new things.
Yeah, I think it's the confidence of the fake it till you make it. So in, like you said, it's access to those resources for training and development. If you're a self-starter who's able to go and find all these sources, and at the weekends you're training yourself up on, like, as Ben was just saying, like on NLP, because you're going to be starting that on Monday. That, to me, that sounds like you are more suited to that kind of startup lifestyle. If you would want something which is a little bit more structured, then obviously joining a larger organization, they will have those resources, they will have that time for training and development, and you might have like a larger support network around you to learn from. Whereas in the startup, you might be the only person who is doing this. So essentially the book stops with you. So I think that there's always kind of, again, it's a very positive thing with startups that you get to develop something completely from scratch, but also, you are responsible for it if it goes wrong. So there's no one else kind of within your team to look for support. You've got to get yourselves out of holes. So it all kind of comes to, if those sort of traits are really kind of, appealing to you, and they are massively appealing to me. I love getting out of a sticky situation kind of quite quickly. Then that kind of sounds like more sort of a startup mentality. You might be more suited for it.
I think also consider whether whether the startup or large corporate, the data problem or the algorithms that they want you to work on, whether those are core to their business model or whether they're just incidental. Because if they're incidental, it means that the data science function will always be a nice to have in the organization, and as the business grows and scales, it would continue potentially to be treated as a nice to have. But there's a very big difference between, say a Netflix where without algorithms and machine learning, it's just a directory of movies, versus and so machine learning is core to the business model. Like Netflix would not exist today without machine learning. versus another company for which the data science strategy might be, oh, well, it would look good on our pitch deck when we're pitching our next round of investments, or, hey, like, it's a curiosity, let's try this thing. So I think that would be one of the things I would look at quite seriously.
Now,
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's so important to make sure that the data science is in the core and it's not a side project, not like a research, unless you want to just do research. But if it's not part of the core, then they won't invest in the data science. They won't give you the support you need. So it will kind of always be in the sidelines.
I think some of that comes back to what you were saying earlier, Chinuki, this concept of having to meet the founders and really get behind the facade of the bravado associated with running a startup, and actually genuinely understand what the business problem is that they're trying to solve, and whether or not that is a data driven issue that you can get your teeth into, knowing that it's a difference between a catalogue of films and a service that empowers people to see the right type of entertainment at the point at which they want to have it delivered. Is there an easier way of doing that?
Well, look, I think if you're joining a startup as a data scientist and the founder it's not important enough for them to talk to you before you join, then maybe that tells you a lot about how important they see that function being.
I just wonder whether, this concept of drilling into the strategy, the direction of travel with the founder is fine. But what about the broader workforce? Can you get the same degree of comfort or due diligence performed by sitting down and doing a chemistry check with other members of the team that you're slotting into? Where's the delineation? Do you want to see everybody in the startup, just the founders, or is there a tier of people you think become important to help you take risk out of your decision?
I'd say the tier's the team you're going to be working on. So the thing I've noticed in big corporations is the higher you go up in the management chain, the more drama exists. And so if it's just your team, you're actually sheltered. So if there's negative toxicity, sometimes down at the team level, in a way you're sheltered from it. Your boss is less so, their boss's boss is less so. So are you going to look forward to working with these individuals? And Jedediah, I really liked one of the things you were talking about, where I kind of come off as being a little anti-corporation, but you're bringing up, well, who's going to mentor you? Like, if you're the only data science hire at a startup, and if it's your first job as a startup, as a data scientist, that's a very dangerous thing. You don't have the experience, and you could actually hurt the startup. You could provide signal because you haven't had that experience. So one of the things I think about is being the smart versus being the dumbest. And if you're room, that can be a trap because the ego is there. You're a rock star, but you're not learning. But if you're the dumbest person in the room, or you've got peers, you're learning every day.
Yeah. Is that something which you feel is I think it's a really interesting point, but is it something that is just a missed opportunity in terms of people being self-starters to the extent that they find their own mentors and coaches and extend their peer group beyond the actual four walls of the office in which they work?
I think it's hard because people get busy. And you don't know what you don't know. I think that's the key thing.
I mean, I would say just like join meetup groups. So I actually run a deep learning computer vision meetup group where, so even if people are working on their own, they can meet with other practitioners in the evening and discuss problems. And there's lots of different meetup groups out there where practitioners can meet together and discuss. So yeah, I don't think you have to shy away just because you might not have a mentor. You need a mentor, but I think there are ways to also find a mentor outside of your work, because a lot of people also just want to help junior data scientists as well for various reasons. So I think there is help out there if you kind of look.
But if you consider the way corporate organizations work with people moving into senior positions, the advice generally these days, a generally accepted practice, is to encourage you to take a mentor outside of the organization rather than somebody inside the organization. You might have someone you regard as a coach or a buddy in the organization who's going to give you the skewed domain expertise and support that you might need for the particular business you're in. But it's been well recognized for some time that taking a mentor outside of the organization is likely to deliver more substantial benefits.
I agree.
Live at that. Sorry.
When I joined ASOS, I was the only data scientist in the organization at the time. It was 2012, and I joined because they give the proposition was, hey, come join and build an entire team and build it the way you want to build it, right? So I think if that's the opportunity, I would definitely recommend jumping at it every single time. Number one. Number two, I did seek out mentors within the organization. Now, I ended up having one of the chief enterprise architects as a mentor, and also someone from a C-level exec who looked after all of the marketing. And so both of them weren't a direct line manager, and so the kind of advice that and the mentorship that was being given was quite objective in that sense, without the kind of politics of you might be my manager as well. And then secondly, it gave me the opportunity to learn a lot outside of just pure data science. So if you think of doing machine learning at scale, like software architecture is one of the must-haves. And so, having the opportunity to learn about things that are kind of sitting just outside of pure machine learning, but actually are so important to doing it in enterprise, at enterprise scale. So I think even within the organization, there would be opportunities for learning and growth that are kind of alongside the what you might consider as your core career.
Did you see, as a group of panelists, do you see differences in terms of how vocal you can be in a startup versus a larger corporate when those things don't happen for you, or when you don't get access to that kind of support?
I think it's a bit of a trade-off. Sometimes in a corporate atmosphere, you can be more vocal because they have the resources to help you and support your development. So it's kind of ironic, because I guess if you're in a smaller company, you would think you would have more voice, but unfortunately, sometimes the founders could be just busy because they need to raise money, and they are just occupied with lots of different things they have to balance. So ironically, you might actually have more of a voice in a corporate company where they have the resources to support the other development needs you might have, where a startup might not their resource start. So just by the nature of it.
It all depends on the culture. So large organizations, they just because they have the resource doesn't mean it's necessarily tied in at the right places. So you might not be able to get the right type of mentors that you're looking for. But I always think kind of mentors is a bit of a funny one, because it's better if you choose them rather than they get chosen for you. So you know what you need as an individual, to kind of push in your sounding board that you're needing. So having mentors from meetups, I think, are amazing places to really find really good mentors and people who are usually a couple of steps down their career. So I would suggest that it's more to do with the individual. I wouldn't really want to have a mentor kind of on a plate for me. That wouldn't seem the right thing to do. It's something that you should be seeking out yourself. So it's whether you seek out within your own organization or you seek out externally. It's kind of on you to do that.
Yeah, I think from my own personal experience, the concept of mentors has always been an interesting subject matter in organisations where I've been told this is your mentor. I've had very poor quality relationships with them, because typically I haven't been able to see the common ground or shared goals in terms of what they have in mind and what I have in mind. So I think, Vicky, your point is quite right there.
Whereas I think in a large organisation, it's not a mentor that you're looking for, it's actually a sponsor. So a sponsor is much more important to you in a large organisation, who is going to put you front and centre into places that you might not necessarily know how to get to. So they will speak on your behalf, they will constantly be pushing for you to get on. Now, that's a very different relationship from a mentor. A mentor is kind of just meant to be the sounding board to guide you. A sponsor is almost kind of forcing you into this and stopping you from doing certain behaviours. So I think in a large organisation, a sponsor is better.
Just to throw a challenge into that, you see, I don't see them as the same character. I've had both in the past in startups and in corporates. And for me, I see them as very, very different people. I think the sponsor is critical. Sponsor is absolutely critical, but I'm not sure I would use the sponsor for the same way I might use for a mentor, where the mentor is helping me to take the journey that I haven't previously trodden, and they're giving me the insight around the pitfalls and ways in which I can accelerate my own learning to benefit from the opportunities that I have within that organization, that employee. The sponsor is quite right, as you said. I think that's somebody who becomes someone who helps amplify my voice in the organization and communicate those messages to the right tiers. And in an ideal world, you'd have both, but obviously in a startup organization, you might find they do end up being one and the same, purely because of capacity or other such issues. But again, I think the difficulty comes, again, my perspective, and I'd be interested in your views, the difficulty comes in terms of what happens if you're not getting that type of support, or you're not getting the right type of support, or your mentor who is pushed on you and you decide they're not actually giving you what you think you need. As Ben said earlier, you don't know what you don't know, but what you learn very quickly is that what you're being given is either working or not working. And if you come to a conclusion that that might mean you need to be vocal about a change, but a change can't easily be accommodated, what do you do?
So,
how do you mitigate the risk?
So Paul, back to a point that you made, I think it's necessary that the mentor is outside the company. And the reason being, if they're in the company, they're not going to tell you to make the leap. Where Jedediah is talking about this opportunity, there's an opportunity to be the first data science hire at a new startup and you build your team. Your mentor in the company is not going to say, you should quit our company. That would be a really good idea and go do this. But an external mentor, and then the other, they will encourage you to do that. They'll have an unbiased perspective. But that's a very scary decision. So to make the leap, high risk, you are going to be underprepared, but the opportunity is huge. And so a good mentor can help you make that leap. And someone in the company, I would argue there's a good chance they're naive. They've worked at the company for 20 years. What do they know about joining a startup?
Good point.
Maybe just to say the obvious, but someone who's never joined a startup can't fully give you advice about joining a startup.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. I tell you, the lessons learned if you look at the .com era, and I remember organisations like Boo.com, which obviously had quite a high-profile crash, but there were no shortage of people queuing up to hire those people because they knew what the taste, smell, look, and feel of failure was, to the extent that they could typically provide that guidance and support to others. So hopefully you charted a way around it rather than tripping over it all over again. Are there other ways in which some of those learnings can be acquired? Is there a meetup, for example, that actually can give you that, or other sources of research and support that you can gain access to?
Personal development. I mean, if you're going to join a startup, you also have the startup mentality, which is it's okay to fail. And it's okay to get it wrong. You have to learn. So you might join a startup, you might think they're like really amazing, and then you learn it didn't work out, and you've got to just be, all right, I got it wrong, I'm going to now move on, I'm going to take what I've learned, I'm going to now apply my learning to my next role. And I think you can kind of learn from yourself and your experiences as well.
But to an extent, isn't that also true of a good corporate?
That a good corporate might not work out. Is that what you're asking? Or?
Well, would a good corporate want you to also operate on the basis of it's okay to take risks, take personal risk, and to fail, so long as we're learning from that and we're still progressing and accelerating our journey?
I just think the appetite for risk in that kind of sense decreases slightly, though, in a large corporate. It's all about mitigating risk in large corporates. So I don't think you'll probably have the kind of all in on red. That's probably not going to be happening in a corporate. Whereas sometimes that will be a situation where it'll happen in a startup.
Mm-hmm. And is there sorry?
I've just seen in corporates, it's just, I think it just has to be realistic, because data science can be incredibly disruptive to an organization. So, you might create something that just can't be used. So yes, you can be innovative and risk-taking as a data scientist, but that doesn't necessarily mean the organization can suddenly adapt and take that over. And the bigger they get, the harder it is for them to adapt. So I think it's a nature, again, of the corporation that can
So
afford to take the risk.
do any of the panel have experience of working for any corporates where there are or there has been a model for some form of in-house incubated startup?
I've seen where they always talk about internal startups. A lot of corporations say that, but they fail at it. So they try to silo internal teams. And the question is, why are they doing that? They're trying to protect them from the red tape. And the red tape is insane. You get into these bigger corporations and you say, I need a $3,000 laptop. And they say, well, we only give $600 laptops. And if you need a $3,000 laptop, you'll have to get 3 levels of approval. And so the companies say this all the time. We have internal startups. Most of them, I'd be curious if people have seen corporates doing that well. I feel like the majority, they say that, and they can't protect it from the red tape or the outside culture.
I think there are plenty of examples of people who do it well, but the way they do it is not. It's essentially not just to say here's a separate silo which is going to coexist with the rest of our corporate structure. They create a whole new entity over here, give it its own reporting structures, its own lines of and rules set around the way in which it operates. So if you look at someone like a British oxygen company where they incubate businesses very, very effectively, they've done it because they've said, well, what we're going to do is actually cut that completely loose from the way we work as a corporate entity and have it operate over here on the basis that it becomes an all or nothing startup based culture. And if people were put into that organization from here, they're not seconded, they're actually transferred. So the risk of failure to them would be just the same as risk of failure in any other startup environment. There's no route back to us. It's not a secondment. You can't just sit there after 3 months and say, this is too hard, I want to come back.
I think a lot of this comes down to the culture of the organization. So at ASOS, the culture was very much like, let's move as fast as we can. But when it came to building a completely brand new personalization framework and functionality, it was such a new thing, and it needed to touch every part of the customer journey. So acquisition, the user experience online, emails, retargeting, customer care, etc. And with large organizations, your production system is usually treated as like quite a precious thing. If you imagine a bug that prevents people from purchasing on ASOS, that would in just an hour or two, that would cost millions of pounds just as an error. And so what organizations would want to do is create some sort of sandbox, and that sandbox could be a kind of everything from just a safe server for you to build and test and deploy your things to sort of on the other end of the extreme, an ivory tower, quote unquote ivory tower innovation team. Ours functioned as a sort of a sandbox where we were able to build on a single machine, deploy something, and then scale up to the cloud, and then scale up to 1% of customers, and then scale up to eventually 100% of customers. And so it was very much about proving in a very safe environment that the new functionality works, with a roadmap and an agreement of how that's taken to more exposure with the customers or with your traffic or whatever that is. And so I think but again, it's about culture. It's about with the senior members of business and understand, from everything from like the kind of the governance, the financial governance of how the organization likes to make decisions around how we take risk and how we manage finances, to how do we agree with our chief technical officer a path from this risky experiments that we run here, and if we're able to prove certain criteria, how can we take this somewhat gracefully into production environments?
That's a really interesting set of points, Gemini. So what about taking that forward then into how you look after the team as you're going through that process? Because the technological side of these things sounds a little bit more mechanistic, and it could be planned and plotted. Things like burnout of staff, or giving people too much responsibility or giving people too little responsibility. I think the challenges that are hard to manage in even the most mature businesses. How does a startup respond to that? How do you continue to make it an attractive place for people to want to work?
I think burnout does not come from the technical challenges, because the data scientists, they love technical challenges. Like, you know, if you could stimulate them intellectually, they love it. Burnout comes from when you're from other things that are around you. So, for example, you have a great idea, but then people don't, you know, support you to do that idea, or don't even give you any kind of space. Maybe the startup is not taking care of the general well-being of the person. Maybe you have a culture where people aren't collaborating and working together to come up with good ideas. So I think the burnout actually is coming from the peripheral things around data science, not necessarily.
What about capacity?
What do you mean? What do you mean by capacity?
Well, you know, there's 3 people are needed to do this job. We've hired 1.
Yes, I mean, so that is basically your so I think that is you tell, you know, your boss is like, this is, you know, unrealistic, and if they're not listening to you, then you probably don't want to be there, to be honest.
Right.
That's a bad kind of culture. It's not going to go anywhere.
That's where I would say like agile data science is really important, right? And, you know, being able to plan and being able to at least estimate how long it will take to do a certain task. And, you know, like, I know from a research point of view, doing agile research is like, you know, like, how long is a piece of string? Well, you can spend the next 20 years researching like a thing, right? And so ring fencing things, and this is why coming back to the earlier point, it's really important to work with other more experienced data scientists, because they can say, hey, look, we know, you know, we can tell the management, like, this task that they're asking for it's not possible to do this in 2 days, or like, if you want this done to a certain level of robustness, it has to be a 2-week job. If you want it done in 2 days, then you're gonna have to sacrifice some of the criteria, right? You're gonna have to de-scope. And so it's about, I think it's about building up the kind of the confidence in knowing how long does a particular story or epic or task take to do, and then having the kind of the confidence to have that conversation with your boss to say, look, I understand that you want this done, but it's simply not possible to do this in this amount of time. In this 2-day period, we can give you, you know, like, these 3 things instead of these 10 things.
Again, sorry, I was just going to say, Ben, I think that's a really, really good point well made in there. But I would argue also that very few people, whether they're in a startup community or in a mature corporate, are particularly good at estimating how long something is going to take. That piece of string issue seems to be an issue with a lot of organizations at both ends of that scale. Sorry, Ben, I cut over you.
Oh, yeah. No, I love this discussion. So because I think Jedediah's response, he's definitely, there's definitely a lot of experience and seasonality that's coming through different projects, and kind of how to set expectations and deal with the reality of delivery. But I think one of the wonderful things I like about startups is the long tail, the bad behavior. And the bad behavior comes up where we can all think of experiences where code is being committed during a live presentation where the executive is about to do a demo, and there's an engineer in the audience committing code for that demo. And everyone, like, people are smiling. They're like, yep. At a startup that has happened. Or you have to do the work of 10 people in a week, and I guess you're sleeping at the office doing like these micro naps. And those examples are not sustainable. Like, you will shut down, burn out, get divorced, things will go off the rails. But if those happen briefly, I think there's something very powerful that can come from that. Maybe you'll be more, you know, be more seasoned, be like, we're never gonna do that again. But yeah, so there is you do have these outlier nightmares that show up in a startup, and I think there's something special about them, but they can't be sustained.
Yeah, I quite like the concept that there's something quite magical about that, but it's only magical for a period of time. 3 years in, it might be slightly less magical.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of linked to the earlier point of just, you know, the idea of the data science being, you know, is that integral and part of the product or the service that the you know, startup's offering. And if so, then there should be an element of confidence of when you're asking people how long something is going to take, you're actually going to, you know, listen to them and factor that in for the next time. If it's AI is just something on the side, then maybe that voice won't get listened to quite as strongly.
The problem I've seen is not that people have difficulty estimating how long something's going to take. It's actually just the fact that the brief is unclear in the first place as to exactly what you're supposed to deliver. So the idea is still kind of a bit woolly. It's still like the specifics are not undefined. And I think as a data scientist, the one thing I can like really advise you to do is to get good at trying to write a specification for your project. Because the more details you have, you want to know exactly what your input is, what is the expected output that, you know, maybe the CEO or is expecting, and try to quantify that as much as possible, because the more clarity you have, then it starts to be easier to estimate. The difficulty in estimating things and when they're a little bit still fuzzy.
Yeah, and you know, I'd say, you know, so if you come to data science from statistics, if you're a statistician and you care lots about the robustness of your model and its kind of and its statistical performance, like you will die when you see how unfinished algorithms are in production in a commercial setting, right? And so it's part of it is sort of developing an understanding of the meaning of done. What does done mean? And realize that like most times, like something that's hacked together might be good enough for the business sort of where it is. And so having that conversation with other engineers or with the managers to just like have a really clear understanding of what is going to be good enough for this next week or this next 2 weeks. Be with the view that, you know, an algorithm is never, you know, every model is wrong, right? But some are more useful than others. And so how useful does the model need to be for this next release or this next month, right?
I suppose kind of just tempering that with not putting yourself into a situation where you're baking in that technical debt if you're going to be building on this. So
yeah.
Technical debt.
And tends to be something that you see too much of.
Yeah, well, in urgency, there's a long list of sins that cause technical debt, and urgency is one of those. So startups have high urgency.
Well, perceived high urgency.
No, actual high urgency, because if something doesn't get out the door, people don't get paid. So
and you run out of cash.
With pre-cash ventures that are well funded, let's just ask the question about can anybody name half a dozen pre-revenue ventures that have ignored urgency? You should be able to list at least 12. You can spare their blushes if you like, but you should be able to think of them. There are plenty of day-to-day examples. Some of you may actually be sitting in one right now.
Sorry, Paul, can you just repeat that?
Yeah, it was about, my point was that with well-funded pre-revenue startups, urgency isn't always a factor. And a number of businesses or startups I've been involved with where trying to get a rocket up the backside of the team and actually tell them that they really do need to be applying a degree of urgency to this is actually quite difficult. It's a challenge. And it's because they don't necessarily see the cash burning down and they don't necessarily see the imperative to deliver that MVP so they can move to the next stage. The availability of cash is almost your enemy when it comes to that particular.
I feel like urgency is a two-sided sword. So the good thing about urgency is it'll force something out the door, like Jedediah hit on. Like the model's not 99%, like it's not really done, but it's enough to get the customer. It's enough to work. And then another thing, so the downside of urgency is sometimes you don't have time to be strategic. So you're just hammering away the next customer. And for people that get a funding round or get an opportunity, or they lose a big contract where there's kind of a lapse, that's an opportunity for you to kind of reflect and realize this is unfortunate, because if we hadn't been so urgent on this particular contract or this customer use case or feature, we may have been able to rise above the clouds and see the strategy a little bit clearer. So in the future, if I do another startup, I'd love to raise enough to not have the urgency of revenue the first 2 years, but also have the experience and the diligence to get to product market fit as quickly as possible.
I think it's an excellent point. And again, the best startups that I see work with are those where they're not seduced by that urgency, but they have done the right thing in terms of setting the strategy and understanding that they don't need to make that rush to get to those revenues. But then they do need to be well funded in order to be able to do that. But there are plenty of examples. In the last week, there are 65 startups that have filed for bankruptcy within the southeast of the UK alone, technology startups that have filed for bankruptcy. And of those, most of them had fallen into this concept of trying to rush an MVP where they didn't necessarily have to do it. But that created so much rework that they ended up burning the cash down because they were basically doubling up on what they originally predicted would be the cost of getting to the MVP. I know it sounds like a sweeping generalization, but the piece of research work that was done by Imperial College, and they looked at this, and they looked at it in relatively granular detail, albeit it was a rush job themselves. And their observation out of the back of this was that what we're going through at the moment, this global pandemic, had actually created a secondary urgency for survival that the startups were facing, that many of the corporates would have deep enough balance sheets that they could avoid it. Ultimately, there's not a lot you can do. If you don't have the cash, you don't have the cash. But there are ways and means of determining whether or not your cash strategy or your funding strategy is going to give you enough time to do these things properly. It's just that often you'll end up with a startup that is, how can I put it, people are banking on their own ego a little bit too much when they come up with the original plan, the initial plan. They believe they can do it in a period of time. In reality, when it starts to play out, they can't deliver on their own promise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, again, kind of a little bit relates back to the spec. So I've seen that with MVPs a lot, is that people have over-spec them. They're over kind of promised before they even know where their product is going. And I think every, like, any seasoned entrepreneur knows that you have to let the product find itself. And the one thing you do not want to do is to develop something too much or too specific. Yeah. So, and that's where the urgency starts to become a problem. I think urgency is interesting because it's good. It shows there's some opportunity there. You want to react to it, but how do you react to it? Do you react to it by like overbuilding and, you know, burning out your team when you don't even know where this product is going? Yeah. Then you can't pivot. So I think that there's a really interesting story. There's something interesting there to explore and understand better.
Yes, it's a continual dilemma. What about longevity of career in startups versus corporates? What do you think of the way people are being sold on the promise of come to the corporate and we'll keep you fulfilled and here forever on the basis that there's always going to be something to do, versus the startup where a pivot might actually make you redundant very rapidly?
I found if you try really hard to work your way out of a job, you will fail. There will always be another job for you. And that, I would say that's true in a startup. And for good startups, like, and I love what Vicky said, you've got good corporations and bad corporations. You've got good startups and bad startups. With good startups, I've seen people get moved all over the place. So someone that is in engineering is now in marketing, or in, like, you get all moved around. But it really deals with your passion, obsession, competency, appetite to learn.
So your own personal characteristics are the key driver and arbiter of whether or not you're going to get that fulfillment.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. I think most people in startups end up having a non-linear career, and that's not a bad thing. If you want to do the large corporate for the rest of your life, it's probably a lot more structured. And unfortunately, I think kind of most people will get to a certain point, and the data scientists all end up just in management. They're not doing data science anymore. Whereas kind of with a startup, I think there's always going to be a finger on that pulse with the technology side of things.
Vicky, that's a really interesting point as well. I mean, do you have views about this notion of being hands-on versus being management? I mean, clearly in a startup, there's a case to be made that it's all hands on deck. But in the corporate, you often do see people moving into management positions where they lose or blunt their skill set as they start to focus much more on the domain itself.
But they then give back in, again, good corporations, they then should give back in other ways. So it's kind of, you then become the voice and the advocate then for the new group of people who are coming in at the bottom, and then you can help steer their careers. We tried options where, you know, management was almost kind of outsourced, so everyone could get on with the technical, and we just like had managers to do the managing, and that kind of works for a bit. But is it scalable? I'm not sure. I think you do actually need to have that form of, you know, sort of larger management, people knowing what you're doing as your day-to-day job.
Yeah, I've seen something similar work relatively well before, but it normally requires people to have that mindset that says that you don't necessarily need to have the technical competency to be an effective manager. But you shouldn't then confuse your job title as that manager as somebody who's got the technical competency, because you may actually do more harm or damage to the project. In terms of people's views on longevity of career, though, this concept of data science as a career has gone through several iterations very rapidly over the last few years, and there's every prospect that it will re-engineer itself as it goes. Do you think there's a defined career path, whether you're in a corporate or a startup, or is there a sufficiently defined career path?
I think it's more about competency than about technical competency. Because I think sometimes, and I've seen some questions here where people, they want to know the secret key. If I know XGBoost, or if I know this, then I'll be set. And it's like, well, no, because that'll be different in 6 months and 6 months and 6 months and 6 months.
Yeah.
So if you focus on the intrinsic motivation to learn and really the passion, if you fall in love with the space, then you'll be fine wherever data science goes. If you feel like you can read a book today and be qualified forever, you will be out of a job.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that and say, if you're always really keen to learn, that's pretty awesome. What I found was, when you get to the position of running a team, how well your algorithms perform or how many algorithms you've built isn't actually like the measure of success. And for a data science team overall, it's really not. It's whether the business is whether your function and your algorithms are actually driving value for the business. And so really what that means is making sure you understand the commercial impetus for any algorithm that you're building, making sure you're asking the right questions, making sure you're ultimately providing value to your business colleagues, like that. And whether you do that with XGBoost or whether with just a spreadsheet, actually, it doesn't matter to them, right? As long as that value is being created.
Can I just suggest we do try and pick up some of the threads that people have been putting into the chat box. I'm not sure there's any out-and-out common thread running through here, but there are some interesting questions coming up. I'm going to center on one which I quite like your views on, this concept of title engineering or badge engineering. You know, you come to our startup and we'll make you the CTO, even though you've got 1 year's experience and maybe you're not the most technical of resources. What are your views about that?
Well,
I
I
find
think
that
it goes.
really.
Oh, you go.
I just find that really irritating when people do that, because it's a lie. And also, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a fake CEO, you're a fake head of data science, and you go out and try to find a job, people will find out very soon that it was a lie, and it doesn't look good on your CV. So I don't really like it when people promise you a job role that isn't actually the job role itself. And I think that's dangerous, because then you go to an interview and people expect you to have this expertise, and they'll soon find out you don't. And that's not good. And then it suddenly looks strange. And then you went high, then you're head of data science. Oh, now you're like just a data scientist. Like, what happened there? Then it looks bad that you failed at something when you actually haven't. You're still going ahead. It's just somebody gave you a title that just was false.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what Jedediah said, that how much value did you deliver? So if my title is CTO or chief data scientist at this little tiny startup, and I suck, and I never deliver value, but I do a lot of really cool research, like a lot of custom coding, versus my title was just scientist or programmer. And if I deliver value, like that should be the primary driver for, what Jedediah hit on: value, not technology. Because I think we have technophiles, and the technophiles, we obsess about the technology rather than the value. Because maybe it's a Bayesian model. Maybe we just run Bayesian models in the background. They offer value.
So is there, just thinking about that, I quite like the idea of value as a competency, or the notion that value could be a competency. Are there other competencies, maybe soft skills, that you think are necessary to thrive and succeed wherever you end up as a data scientist?
Hundreds of them. I think in data scientists it's so interesting because you can't just be like your stereotypical techie. I don't think anybody should actually be like that. But you know, you need to be really good at communicating your ideas, because data science is not that very, you know, not easy to understand. And if you can't communicate why you came up with a certain solution, then that's not really going to help you. You need to learn how to collaborate, because if you don't collaborate with others, you're not going to build something that's going to be powerful. Especially as a data scientist, you need to work with different teams to come up with your solutions. If you're not a people person and you're just the kind of person that has to like just sit there and focus on your algorithm, then you're not going to develop anything of value. So, I mean, there's tons of soft skills we actually need to be a good data scientist. And I think there's not enough focus on that, and it's so important.
I think that creativity is a really important one, because 9 times out of 10, the data that you actually end up having hasn't been created for the purpose that you actually want to use it for. So you need to be thinking all the time of different ways of kind of getting this data, smashing it together, augmenting it with something else, and that kind of that takes you away from like hyper parameter tuning a model. You know, that's fantastic. Software can do that. You don't necessarily, you know, Ben's company software can do that. So you know, but knowing where to try to source that additional kind of data, how to bring all those different bits of things, different streams of data together, that's the creative element of it, and the interpretation of what the problem is into a data problem. I had, like, so we're talking about mentors. My mentor, you know, people say that he just sees the world in ones and zeros, and it is being able to do that translation piece is key. And I think that's where the majority of AI projects kind of fall down, because it's either AI has been brought in as this, that, like, you know, it's a novelty term, or it's that it will solve all the problems. And, you know, like just simple counts of stuff that would do. You know, you don't always need the most fancy solution to deliver that value.
Happens in a lot of other areas as well. You do get get a lot of people that are hell bent on implementing blockchain solutions, where a relational database would be quite more than adequate.
Mm-hmm.
I would just double down on that translation piece, because I always say that you need to mind the gap between like the language the business users are using and the ones that the technologists and data scientists are using. And there's a chasm there in between those two functional groups. And so if as a data scientist, you're able to bridge that gap, then, you know, you'd find that you'd find a lot more success in that organization. And I'd say like another one of the attendee questions was about PMs, so project managers or product managers for data science. I think, you know, ideally they might provide that gap, that bridging between the different parts of the organization. But in the lack of a good project manager or product manager for data science, I think data scientists everywhere should, as much as possible, find a kind of an additional hat to wear where they're bridging that gap.
Let's step away from their keyboards and go talk to people. Yeah.
Yes.
I think in technology, you see different career paths where you'll see deep technology versus management. And I think that exists in data science as well. So if you can really master this communication or this business acumen, you'll do very well as a data science lead and kind of move up the ranks and the management style. But you can also just exist as just deep tech. Like you can read white papers, you can ramp on new solutions, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you would not be a good fit for a data science manager because you can't communicate. You haven't figured out the mismatch with the jargon.
So I think we've covered off a lot of the competencies, and we know that there are a lot of skills required that need to be bespoke or specific, and that specificity is quite important, subject to what it is that is the business problem you're trying to solve. But what would you give as advice to somebody leaving university now about how they might actually make their own assessment as to where best they might fit, how they might make a decision?
I think kind of what Shaniki was saying earlier, go to meetups, do your homework, talk to people. You know, it's going and finding out the teams that you're like, you know, I would say in the main, there's not that many startups for all of our university grads to go and be the head of data science in all of them. So you probably are going to be joining a team. Go and find like where these guys meet, you know, and just get talking to them and work out whether the culture is the right place for you as an individual. Do you want to be working 60-hour weeks? Do you want to kind of, is pay the biggest thing that's or your title, or, you know, career progression? Is that thing that's more important to you, or doing something that you absolutely love and adore and you just don't actually notice the hours passing by?
Yeah, I think it is important to kind of go and meet people. Also, there are different types of startups. So there are the kind of, you kind of work the 60 to 80 hours, crazy startups. And then there are startups that actually, you know, they take your well-being into account. So, you know, even in the startup space is a whole range of different flavors, which you only know when you actually kind of just talk to people and get an understanding.
I think it's a fair point. It's a good point that somebody had raised earlier in the chat window, was how you define a startup. You know, I look back over the years, and 20 years ago we didn't call, or 30 years ago we didn't call them startups. We called them new businesses. These days we call them startups. The problem is we give them that label, and in reality it's probably doing it an injustice. Is there a way of actually almost classifying what are high risk startups versus what might be more sensible ones to call it?
Any startup that gives a senior engineer a CTO title, that's a high risk startup. So watch out for those.
That's a good one. I think where they are with their funding, right? Is it seed funding stage? Is it Series A stage? Because which stage the funding means they had to convince somebody, and it's a little bit of a signal that they're able to convince. If they try to do that and they haven't even like really secured the seed funding, then very like high risk. So it depends on how much funding I think can be. It's not 100%, but it gives an indication.
I think it's an important point. I think again you're looking for a degree of confidence in the value proposition that they're purporting to be able to offer, and a lot of that comes from knowing that a lot of very bright people have been doing a lot of very detailed due diligence on that venture before you arrive, and that might result in a healthy enough investment in the business. Hopefully that gives you some confidence as to whether it's a high risk play or not.
Well, also first time founder versus second time founder. So if you have an opportunity to join a startup and it's a second, third time founder and they've raised a decent amount of money, I would say that sounds pretty low risk.
Yeah.
But if it's first time founder and it's a seed, buckle up, buttercup, like roll the dice.
Yeah. Good stuff. So back to the point about what our advice would be. So it's a little bit in there about joining the meetups, going out and talking to other people. Are there any other sources? Are there any really good online hangouts that people can go to get an insight or to have conversations in this, what has now become an even more important connected economy since face-to-face meetings have become problematic?
If you're into computer vision deep learning, then I do have a meetup that you can join. So just message me and I'll happy to add you to that, because we've got tons of different founders that you can actually have a chat with and get to really understand. So it's specialized in the computer vision space. So we've got, the corporates, we've got the startups, you actually, and everybody's really friendly. So it's a kind of a nice place to go to if you're interested in that space, to just have a chat with people. So that's one I can recommend.
I also, kind of a bit of LinkedIn research. Again, it shouldn't be that hard. Go and find someone with a rough job title that you're looking for, drop them a line, say, would it be worth kind of having a chat what your organization's like? I think I would prefer for people to have had some form of informal conversation with someone in my organization rather than us spending the time and effort to go through an interview process. That short conversation, pretty much I think you can decide within about 15 minutes whether the organization and you are the right type of fit for each other.
I think the other thing is that you also have to be unafraid to fail. You will get it wrong and it's okay, and you have to kind of accept it. Sometimes there's just no way of knowing, especially if you're early in your career. You don't really know if you're kind of the startup person or the corporate person. I think you can kind of guess, but you can also guess it wrong. So I think you just have to try.
I can't remember who it was. It may have been Vicky actually talking about the linear career path. And you know, I don't see going forward any necessity for it to be so linear. I think the fact that you might spend 3 to 5 years working in a corporate and then 2 to 3 years working in a startup and then flip the tenure for your next is actually not a bad thing, because you're then giving you the ability to cross-fertilize, bringing good, bright ideas and moving agile and fast into the corporates. But you're able to take those governance procedures and, you know, mature management practices back to your future startup domain.
I would say I think someone needs to write an algorithm for this. I think they need to have an algorithm to help us figure out whether, you know, candidate would be a good match fit for corporation or startup, and how that fits in with your overall kind of career projection, kind of objective function, right?
I think that sounds like a good project for Jed.ai and MBN to work on together.
Yeah, Michael, we should talk.
Good stuff. Do any of you have any closing remarks about your own careers and what you might have done differently in terms of the career choices you've made?
I have a quick thought that I was kind of thinking about. A startup is really the refiner's fire. Like, they're the long tail, the nightmare of a startup, as terrible as it can be, there's something beautiful that comes from it. And we went through a really hard moment at the startup 1 or 2 years ago. My wife forced me to do a vacation to Mexico with her and some friends. I remember waking up at 3 a.m. to work. I just have to work. I have to work and then pretend like I'm not working. So I'm not sleeping, working at night, and then being a zombie during the day. And I remember sitting on the beach and watching the sunrise, which was gorgeous, and thinking, if my startup fails, my life is worth living. But to say that out loud, to kind of realize is like, I don't see myself as being a high risk individual, or that like I was suicidal, but that just shows the pain, or like the weight that a founder can carry trying to go through this startup process. And I feel like going through a startup, I'm actually a better father. I'm a better parent. And these are crazy, crazy things that would never happen in this short of a time scale, but a startup will do that to you. And so for any founders or anyone out there doing a startup, mental health is so important. And reaching out to other mentors. We had some great mentors. One of them, Mark Newman, we called him our startup Jesus. If you're having a bad day, you call Mark Newman, because he's been through the refiner's fire. So yeah, I love founders.
Good stuff. Anyone else as a closing remark?
I mean, I have said that like a few times, like, don't be afraid to fail. And just concretely, basically, it's like, you know, if you take on a job and it doesn't work out, and if you leave immediately, it's not going to look as bad as you think. And I've seen sometimes people stick it out a little bit too long, and they're like, oh, but that's going to look bad on my CV. You know, I've only stayed there, you know, 6 months. No, it's not. You know, there's tons of jobs out there for data scientists. If somebody else is going to grab you, and you're going to have a job just like that. And if you know, don't worry about getting it wrong. And then if you get it wrong, don't stay, because it's going to drain you and drag you down. And you want to keep your passion, you want to keep your intellectual stimulation up, then go find somebody else that actually appreciates you.
My advice is no single data scientist knows everything. You have to just know where to look for stuff, which is much more important. I think kind of a lot of young data scientists are all hung up on the technical, and they feel like they have to be technical experts over image processing, NLP, you know, kind of the latest data science techniques for that are in AutoML. It's just kind of know where this stuff exists, know how you can access it. You don't need to be a master at it all. You will not do a job where you need it all.
Yeah.
My advice would be, as you're shaping your objective function, your career objective function, I would say to prioritize learning, like lifelong learning and growth. Prioritize clear communication, and and try to have some fun in there as well.
I think that's a great point on which to end today's session. Having fun should be at the heart of pretty much everything we do. I want to thank everybody for joining us. It's a fantastic insight from a great bunch of people who really know their domain expertise and their subject matter expertise. So thank you once again for being our panelists, and I'm sure you're getting a virtual round of applause from all of our participants. Thank you very much for joining us again today. Michael?
Thanks very much. That was great.
Thanks.
Really enjoyed that. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was great conversation.
Nice to meet you all.